Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Again, my name is Lance Binoniemi. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Michigan Infrastructure and Transportation Association, more commonly known as MITA. MITA represents over 500 companies across the state that build our roads, bridges, underground water and sewers, tunnels, utilities, everything in the heavy construction industry. I've got a couple things that we've heard from other testimonies in the past couple of weeks, but I think they bear repeating just because it's complicated on how we fund our road system in the state of Michigan. Traditionally, you fund roads and bridges throughout the country with user fees. Gas taxes, registration fees, toll roads, which we do not have in Michigan, and some states put some of their sales tax towards their transportation network as well. Our federal gas tax is 18.4 cents per gallon. That has not been increased since 1993. Our state gas tax is 28.6 cents per gallon in Michigan, and our registration fees are based off the value of a vehicle. As I mentioned, we have no toll roads in Michigan. Michigan is one of 5 states across the country that assesses sales tax on its motor fuel, of which very little of that is used for transportation purposes. We believe it's our biggest funding policy problem that we have when it comes to funding our roads and bridges. It artificially inflates our gas tax, and it does not put the money where people in our state believe it should be going. In 2015, we had a road funding package that passed. As signing, Governor then Rick Snyder said it's a good down payment. It was not the full road funding package that is sustainable throughout moving forward. That package included 7.3 cents gas tax increase that got increased in 2017, a 20% registration fee increase across the board, and for the first time in Michigan history, dedicated general fund revenues to transportation, fully implemented $600 million by 2021. And I want to put those dates in perspective. Back in 2011, Governor Rick Snyder then came out with a special message on infrastructure. And in 2011 suggested that we needed $1.2 billion more annually to continue to maintain our roads in 90% good and fair condition. As you can see, by 2021, that 1.2 came into fruition. Over that decade, our roads deteriorated quite a bit. Had we gotten 1.2 billion infused into the system in 2011, we may not be talking about road funding today. In addition to revenues, the 2000 road funding package also includes some reforms and credits. It expanded the homestead property tax credit. It put together the Road Innovations Task Force, which set aside a $100 million lockbox for the department to produce longer-lasting roads, and we have those projects out there right now and are being analyzed. It also expanded the use of road warranties to the local level. In 2016, then Governor Snyder put together a 27-member commission, the 21st Century Infrastructure Commission, which came out with a 188-page report. I encourage all of you to read at least the executive summary of that report. It had 100 different recommendations. For this purpose, it found a need of $2.2 billion more annually over the next 20 years that we need in our transportation network to keep it up at 90% good and fair condition. We've had some revenue since 2016, some major ones. The Congress passed the Infrastructure Investments and Job Act, which will see some investments through the year 2026. The governor put together a Rebuilding Michigan program, which is a 4-year bonding program that invests $3.5 billion into our highway network. But where are the revenues from 2027 and beyond? The state needs an equitable, long-term, sustainable road funding solution. A little bit more on the Investments and Job Act. As you can see, before it went into fruition, we were seeing $1.125 billion from Congress, from the feds to Michigan and to our transportation network. For 5 years moving forward from there, we will see about a $460 million increase each year for 5 years. Again, it is short term. And it's also less than that $2.2 billion that the 21st Century Infrastructure Commission suggested that we needed on an annual basis. So we continue to dip down even further. Why is this all important? This is a really, really old chart, and I brought it up because I think it's significant. I used this in a 2013 presentation, and back then it predicted that we would be at 65% poor roads by 2023 if we did nothing. Now by 2015, because of the road funding package, we have done slightly better. But as you can see with a chart that came out earlier this year in MDOT presentations and House Fiscal, and I believe that Chairman Outman suggested we should all be scared with this chart, and I believe if we do nothing, we are looking at our road systems being below 50% good and fair condition by 2028. Why is it important that we talk about good and fair conditioned roads? In Michigan, back in the 90s, we started the Transportation Asset Management Council, and that was a huge step forward in rating our roads in Michigan. They put together a very accurate report every year with projections on how our pavement conditions will be moving forward. As you can see from this chart right now, we sit about 67% good and fair condition roads and 33% poor condition roads on our federal aid. As you might suspect, our non-federal aid roads or more local roads are even worse condition. Only 55% of those are in good and fair condition and 45% are in poor condition. And we use good and fair condition and poor condition because for several decades, the state has had a goal of bringing its road and bridge system to 90% good and fair conditioned. As you can see with some of these forecasts, we're going in the wrong direction. Here's pavement condition forecast 2023 to 2033. The poor continue to get up, and the good and fair conditioned roads continue to minimize. Our bridge system is worse than our road system, quite honestly, and that's why we're seeing some extra revenues being put in there from state coffers. Our good conditioned roads or bridges continue to go down. Our fair conditioned roads are going up, but that's because those good conditioned bridges are slipping into fair condition, and our poor conditioned bridges seem to be flattening out a little bit, hopefully trending in the right way eventually. Our forecasts, again, for our bridge conditions are no much better. We continue to see a decline in the number of good and fair condition and an increase in the number of poor condition bridges. Okay, so why is it all important to have good and fair and poor conditioned roads? Well, because the Transportation Asset Management Council has been in existence for several decades, they have become very good at using asset management to maintain our road system. As you can see on my chart, invest early. You can spend $1 on a good and fair conditioned road and save $6 to $14 on a reconstruction road that has gone to poor condition. And so the more we invest now, the more we will save in the future, and the longer we will continue to have that road last. As I mentioned before, the legislature had asked us to look at doing 50-year roads and how would that look with preventative maintenance. And you can see a life cycle here of a 50-year road asset management, which is the goal. So with all of these investments that we saw coming out of Congress, the bonding investments out of the governor, we really wanted a newer study. And so for the past year, we asked public sector consultants to come up with a needs study. As you can see, Michigan Transportation Infrastructure Needs and Funding Solutions. Came up with a needs study as well as some potential solutions on how to come up with that need. And as you can expect, it's much more than $2.2 billion more annually needed that we need to keep our road and bridge system in 90% good and fair condition. The needle has now moved to $3.9 billion. It's obvious that the longer we do nothing, the more this becomes expensive. And if we continue to sit on our hands and wait for continued crises, it will not solve its problem on its own. We have started a campaign several years ago called Fix My State. It's an ongoing educational campaign to bring these numbers to light to the citizens. I think that they can see our poor roads. They can see that their damaged tires and their rims are costing them more and more each year. But I don't think that they fully understand on how we actually pay for our roads. And so research, polling, and focus groups go into that. We have a large coalition of business organizations, labor, tourism, agriculture, transportation, you name it. We were over at the Chamber of Commerce this morning, introducing our report that comes out from Public Sector Consultants. You all have a copy of that report and the executive summary within the folder that we gave you, as well as my card. Feel free to reach out on any of these issues from the report. I encourage you to follow us on fixmystate.org to get up the most recent findings that we have put out there. And again, I've met with several of you and have mentioned this, but if there's ever a time that you have a transportation need or question, you can always feel free to call me. If you have a project going on in your district that you want questions on, we know the right people to ask at least. We might not have the answer right away, but certainly we can point you in the right direction. Feel free to use us as a resource, please. Any other questions that you or the committee may have, Mr. Chairman?
Well, thank you so much for that sobering presentation. It's something honestly that we need to be thinking about. And I will just say, I don't really have a question, but I do have a comment that, you know, a lot of times when we talk about poor roads and the damage they do to our cars, it's an inconvenience, and I'm using that term lightly. We have a broken rim, we have a flat tire, that's an inconvenience. But there are also real safety issues that are involved. And many of us up here have either kids or grandkids that are in our cars on those roads, dodging potholes, you know, doing the same thing, playing defensive driver against somebody who might be doing the same thing. So these are serious safety issues that need to be considered, and you know, we really need to come together and figure out how we solve this problem, because these stats are not good. And you know, I'm hoping that over the next couple of years we can really have you know, meaningful conversations around this issue of road funding. So with that, I will take Representative Roth for the first question.
Lance, thanks for being here. Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me the question. In all great things, we have all the money we need. Where are the workers? Are we any better off than we were a couple years ago, Lance?
Yeah.
We talked about this before.
Anytime we talk about increased revenues for roads, the question is, you know, are we going to have the road workers to do the work? And every time we've had an increase that occurs, whether it's large or small, the industry has always stepped up and done that. So the short answer is yes on that. In 2016, we also started developing a lot of programs that are going into the high schools and going into the junior highs to recruit more people. Community colleges have set up some very unique programs that go towards transportation management and road workers management. So we have definitely increased that workforce. One of the good things about COVID. One of the things about COVID, while some industries were losing employees, these are very good paying jobs, and they're career-long jobs. And so we didn't see an exodus out of we actually saw some people come in from other industries to go work in the trades. So the last thing I will say is our former president would always say that I can either hire someone for a job or I can hire someone for a career. And continued revenue dips and increases that we've seen over the past 10, 15 years are not good for business to hire careers. It's very unstable. And so a consistent revenue source that doesn't continue to go up and down will allow our members to employ those employees and make the investments into their safety training and into their equipment training. We'll make those investments into the more modern equipment to build better and more efficiently. I think one last thing I will say about employees, and I think this gets a little bit construed, let's just arbitrarily say we double our transportation budget tomorrow. We do not need double the amount of employees. It's not a correlation one-on-one. And some of these larger fixes that we are doing, the money is more in the materials. It's not necessarily more in the workers. So,
I appreciate that.
Thank you, Representative Roth. And I'll just comment a little bit about that also as far as getting workers to do the job that we need them to do. Something that we can tackle on this committee, and something that we started over the past actually couple terms, was road worker safety. We need to make this job more desirable for people to want to get into this field that is so desperately needed. And so that's something that we can do, and something I hope to focus on this committee is road worker safety, making the job more desirable. With that, thank you, Representative Roth. Minority Vice Chair Outman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Lance, thank you for being here. I just want to kind of reinforce something you said. And to Representative Ross' credit, I totally understand where he's coming from. There is an issue of just throwing a ton of money into our transportation budget without having the labor to back it up. I mean, all you do is artificially inflate the cost of these projects without any sort of value. So I understand that, but you made a really good point here, and that is the fact that we don't have a new dedicated additional stream of revenue to our roads and infrastructure. So it's really hard for you and these road construction companies to gear up and hire a bunch of people if there's a lot of uncertainty looming there, and there's not a dedicated revenue stream. A lot of these one-time monies that we allocate, I mean, that's all fine and dandy, but in the long run, we got to look at a new dedicated revenue source potentially. And so my question to you is, so initially we thought we needed $2 billion in additional revenue. Per the report you just mentioned, it's looking closer to $4 billion. That's a pretty large increase than what we even thought. And it doesn't necessarily surprise me, but my question to you is, and I mentioned this, I believe it was last week's committee hearing, and that is, I believe it's going to take a little bit of existing and new revenue streams, and I was curious to get your thoughts on that.
We certainly think that we need new revenues. We don't believe that the state budget can handle an increase of this size, let alone a $2 billion increase. Where that new revenue comes from, we don't think it's a silver bullet. We think that every option has to be on the table, and what's most palatable to the legislature and the public to get to where we need to be. And it's a quality of life question too. Do we want our roads at 67 good and fair conditioned, or do we want our roads at 90% good and fair conditioned? We have that opportunity, and we want to pay for that opportunity. It's a tough question, but I think it's throughout the next several months. I think some of these options will come out, and we at MITA will be testing different scenarios with focus groups and seeing, no one's ever polled on tolling, in my opinion. So I don't know how the state and the public believes in tolling and whether they agree with it or not. So those conversations are going to continue.
Certainly, and I totally agree with you. I mean, there is no one silver bullet to fix this issue. I mean, we've been neglecting our infrastructure for a long time, and it's not just exclusive to Michigan. It's nationwide. We've been neglecting our infrastructure, but we know it's been plaguing our state for a couple of decades now. And if we don't address this issue, I don't see businesses fleeing to Michigan. I don't see our state reaching full economic potential if we don't have good infrastructure. And so I agree. I think all options should be on the table. I think we should take a look at tolling. We should take a look at vehicle miles traveled. All these other options and proposals that are available, I think we should keep them on the table. But again, I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Conlon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Lance, for this very informative presentation. So, yes, I didn't hear you mention, electric vehicles, but obviously that's something we're all very aware of is going to also change our funding model going forward. And so, to his point, I was wondering how much you're going to be polling around mileage. And somebody had mentioned to me maybe we need some kind of incentives to get a mileage study going of drivers who would participate in a mileage study to see what that would even look like to start to investigate these other kind of models.
Yeah, there's no question that because more fuel-efficient vehicles and electrifying our fleets are dropping our revenues down for our road and bridge network, that we have to look at something different. And there are 18 or 19 other states that have already put in some sort of vehicle miles traveled pilot program or just implemented it. And there's 2 or 3 regions throughout the country that have done as well. And so Michigan's a little bit behind the 8 ball here on this one. And we believe we need to at least understand it and to start looking at it immediately. We agree. We believe that, regardless of the fuel source, the amount of damage you're putting on the road and the number of times that you're doing that should equate to how much you pay for that road.
Representative Frott.
I want to build off that point you just made about regardless of the emission type. Have we looked at vehicle weight at all, or weight of the actual freight that's being transported on our roads. I know Michigan leads is a leader in allowing some of the most generous weights on our roads. Is there any research behind what the sweet spot is for the weight of a vehicle compared to the damage it does?
In terms of the damage it does, I'm not sure. There are several studies that will show that in Michigan, we actually, for truck weights, we actually base it on their per axle weight. So it spreads the weight out even further rather than gross weight. And there's a great study out of U of M that will suggest that puts less damage to the road than over gross weight with less axles on it. So I think while we allow some of the heaviest weights on our roads right now, that fleet is about 3 to 4% of our trucks are carrying over that 82,000 pound weight. So it's a very small number of trucks that are doing that. And again, we spread it out. You can only be 19,000 pounds per axle. So you spread it out over more axles, and you should be doing less damage to the road. We're open to any discussions, and we will say that trucking is one of the highest costs right now in our in road building, and truckers are really high demand. There's a huge shortage. So, adding more trucks to the road. I remember former Speaker Jace Bolger, who used to drive the 94 corridor, when they talked about eliminating the heavier trucks within Michigan, he didn't want to see double the amount of roads going on his commute to 94. And that's potentially what you could see, is just more trucks on the road. And we don't like the trucks on the road now. So lowering the weights will put more trucks on the road and exacerbate our shortage that we already have in the drivers.
Thank you.
That's a very good point. Representative Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Binoniemi, for being here today. I have one question for you on this graph here, kind of showing these intervention points. First part of this question is this with current technology, so no change in necessarily the materials or the process by which we are installing these roads? Right. Okay. With that kind of proactive management then, these intervention points that we see here, and remind me, CPM?
Capital preventative maintenance.
Thank you. Are those subject to review? Are those still, would there still be a subjective determination saying this is not necessarily needed in, what is this here, 2029, but might be able to hold until 2031 before that CPM takes place? I guess that's kind of my curiosity, is where and how these points are determined, which I guess that still then leads its question to the point of, well, if we've delayed this for 2, 4, 6, 10 years, are we still seeing the same benefit if we're delaying those intervention points?
That's a tough question to answer, but the engineers might be able to answer that a little bit better afterwards. But absolutely, there's a review process of when they decide to put rehab on or capital preventative maintenance measure on a road, and then gets bid out to the qualified bidders. In terms of spreading it out, I think you're just going to see the road get worse the longer you go. So that end of the 10, 20 years where we put a layover, it may only last 3 years, right? It's not going to last the longer-term layover because your base has already been broken up enough. So I would suspect, although the engineers may correct me, that the longer you wait to do that preventative maintenance, the worse the road gets.
With this graph, too, I find it interesting because if you extend this 1 year out, you can put another, red ladder on this, right, showing the life. So you'd have to build this twice unless we are intervening at these, with these CPMs and the rehabilitative measures.
If you really deepen the weeds on our report, you'll see that if we do nothing and we just build the road and then we let it die and then we build it again, it's way more expensive.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much, Lance. I really appreciate you coming in and giving us your presentation.